Hello, everybody. We've got our second U.S. Senate retirement for 2026. It's going to be in Minnesota. It's Tina Smith this time who's going to join Gary Peters from Michigan as the two senators, creating new opportunities for someone to fill the political void. And this could mean another headache for the Democrats on a Senate map where they were hoping to go on offense. So we're going to take a look at this race. We're going to look at the candidates. We're going to see the last time Republicans had success here, and we'll talk about the potential outlook. So first, from the Minnesota Star Tribune, DFL Senator Tina Smith, who's been in office since 2018. She's not going to run for re-election to a second full term. But we've already got Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. She's going to run to replace Smith. It says others reportedly mulling a run include Governor Tim Walz and U.S. Rep. Angie Craig. So as we scroll through this, I'm going to say this is a little bit of a surprise, but it's a little less so than Gary Peters in Michigan. But it does put Democrats on the defensive on a map where they were hoping to make some gains to be able to regain control of that chamber. It's early in the season. We're going to see some more retirements. But so far, it's two Democrats in states that are not extremely blue. Now, Minnesota is bluer than Michigan. Democrats are going to start out favored. They've got a bench, but there's no question Republicans should mount a serious challenge for this seat. If in the past couple of cycles, Democrats are trying to compete in Texas, Florida, and Ohio, then obviously Republicans are not going to just roll over here in Minnesota. Now, given the national environment, should probably favor the Dems at least a little bit. I do think Republicans are going to be the obvious underdogs. Now, we'll look at their potential bench in a bit, but just like the Dems in Michigan, the Dems here have to dip into their bench and find the right candidate that can have a wide enough appeal to maintain control of that key Senate seat. There's some good picks they can go with, and then there's some not so good picks. But if Republicans somehow flip this seat, that would be an absolute implosion for the Dems. This is territory Dems have to secure before they start going on offense. So if they have to sink money and resources into this race, they better hope it's a clear blue wave in next year's national environment. As for Tina Smith, she's kind of a senator that just blends into the background. You don't really hear about her too much. She seems to be more of the safe establishment choice, similar to their other senator, Amy Klobuchar. She's not that old. She could have ran for another term, but hey, not everybody wants to sit in office until they're in their 70s. So let's get over to Wikipedia. Let's take a look at this race. So first, the quick background about this seat. Tina Smith first won a special election back in 2018. That was to fill the remainder of the term of Al Franken, who resigned. Then in 2020, she went on to win a full 6-year term. We're going to look at those in just a moment, but it does say here this is the first open seat since 2002 and the first without an incumbent running since 1942. So we can go down here and take a look at the candidates. But if it was Tina Smith who was going to run for another term, there's no guarantee she would be able to win this seat on her own. I think it would make it more likely. But this is a state where Republicans might be hoping the demographics could be similar to a nearby state like Wisconsin or Michigan, and that could be enough to at least make the state competitive. And maybe in the next couple of elections, they could pull out a statewide win here. Let's see who the potential candidates are here for the Dems. Again, Peggy Flanagan, she's the only one in so far. Maybe her coming out early makes her the front runner, who knows? Tina Smith used to be the lieutenant governor as well, and usually lieutenant governor is not really all that consequential of a position. The notable exception there is going to be in North Carolina with one Mark Robinson. Now also listed here as publicly expressed interest is Ilhan Omar. And I'm sure there's going to be some people that are going to be a big fan of Omar. Most people, I would guess, are not going to be that big of a fan. But for me, Omar would be the clear weakest pick of these candidates. She's just going to be viewed as too controversial coming from the left. We've seen people like that on the right, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. The Dems have their own group of candidates that I think would be mostly unelectable in a statewide or national race. Now, I'm sure of Omar's policy positions, at least 25% of them most people would broadly agree with. And of those, most of them are going to be on the economic side. Now, outside of that, maybe half of her views, mostly on cultural or social issues. I don't think they're going to resonate with a very wide audience. Now, anything can happen, and this state does have a shade of blue to it. But if it was Omar, I would think Republicans might be actually favored to flip that seat. Now, that's just what I think. Maybe you think Omar is a super strong progressive candidate. But I think if you're the Dems and you want to win this race, the person you want to go with here is going to be U.S. Rep. Angie Craig. She's going to have that suburban appeal, and she's not going to be viewed as extremely polarizing. So that kind of a blend of having somewhat of a moderate approach, I think that's a recipe for success in this state. Now, some of the other candidates on here, like Keith Ellison, I also think he would be a weaker candidate. He barely won his races for Attorney General both times, including the blue wave of 2018. It doesn't mean he can't win. He already did statewide. It just means I think he would be a weaker candidate than Craig. Now, I'm not familiar with all these candidates on here, but you've also got Governor Tim Walz. Now, that would create another shockwave of the governor's race. If Walz decided to not run for a third term and instead run for the Senate, I would have to guess he would start off with an advantage. But then, of course, the governor's race could become highly competitive. Now, I hear a lot of different things about Walz. Some people say he's great, he's elected. unelectable, etc. Other people say he's despised in the state. So I think there's different factions out there. But obviously Walz has had some success statewide. And even though he was on the losing presidential ticket, I would have to say he's going to be durable enough to win another race here, either as governor or maybe for the Senate. So we got to see what Walz is going to do. If he does run for the Senate, I would guess he would be the front runner based on his high profile. Now, other candidates here that have declined to run. You've got Al Franken on here. Now, Al Franken is someone I don't think should have resigned. And I actually think he would have a lot of success if he decided to make another run for it. Even though he's not young anymore, I think his brand would likely be able to carry him over the top again. You've also got Dean Phillips here, who's declined. I'm not sure what Phillips is going to do in the future. He got out of the House. He's had an opportunity for the Senate. Doesn't look like he's going for governor either. So maybe he's just president or bust at this point. But I also don't know his status on making amends with the establishment. So a lot of the focus here is going to be on the Dems. But the Republicans are hoping to make a splash here and put this state back on the map. We've got one declared candidate so far. That's Royce White. Now, he took an easy loss to Klobuchar a few months ago, and he's kind of viewed as too controversial for that state. Now, maybe he rebrands himself somehow, but I don't think he would be the candidate to be able to win this race. So given the bench here is thin, the Republicans might have to dip into the state Senate or the House. It might be a candidate that people are not really overly familiar with just yet, but sometimes those are the politicians that are up-and-coming stars. Now, one of them is Karen Housley. She already ran against Smith back in 2018 in that special election. We'll take a look at that in a minute, but she might be gearing up to make another run. Outside of them, you've got Tom Emmer and Tim Pawlenty, who have declined to run for this seat. I think that's a pretty good idea. The GOP is probably wise to go in a new, more modern direction. So we'll give it some time. We'll see how the field develops on both sides. But you never know, maybe something crazy like Jesse Ventura could come back and run as an independent or the Reform Party. And right now this race is rated as Battleground and Lean D. I would easily put this as Lean D myself. This is going to be the Dems' race to lose. Now let's actually look at Tina Smith's last win in 2020. So this was during a presidential election, and she won with 48.7. Jason Lewis got 43.5. So that's a little over a 5-point win for Smith. Meanwhile, she's under 50%. Now, there is a third-party candidate here that likely did pull some away from Smith, but this was a high turnout election, and ultimately Smith underperformed and Jason Lewis did overperform the polling just a little bit. But you can see here most of the counties are red. Of course, the Iron Range is still blue, but the suburban counties outside of the Twin Cities, Ramsey and Hennepin counties, that's where a ton of the population is, and those counties are not red. So unsurprisingly, Smith wins this seat, but maybe some shifting demographics could put this seat in play in the next election. That could be in 26. Now, what about in that special election for Smith a couple of years earlier? Well, here it is against Karen Housley, and this was a comfortable win over 10 points. The map is not really significantly different either, but this was during the blue wave where Democrats had a ton of success across the country. So that's what gave Smith the win here. Now, prior to Smith, Al Franken won 2 terms. His first one in 2008 was extremely narrow. Just to take a look at it for a second, it's right here. Now, this was also during a blue wave. Democrats had a ton of success, but in this blue state, Franken barely won this seat. It was only by a couple hundred votes, and he got it done with 42%. Now, in the next election in 14, it wasn't close at all. He won by more than 10 points. So a lot of times, all you got to do is get your foot in the door in the right environment, and you could hold that seat for a lot longer. But in this election, Franken actually defeated incumbent Senator Norm Coleman, the Republican. And if we go back to 2002, this is the last time the Republicans won a Senate election in this state. Now, they haven't even won any statewide races since 2006, when Tim Pawlenty won his second term for governor. But the notable thing about this race is Coleman actually took down Walter Mondale. He's a legend in this state. He was the vice president, and he's also a former U.S. Senator himself. Now, he did step in at the last minute after Paul Wellstone was killed in a plane crash, but you think his name ID and his reputation would have guaranteed he would hold this seat. This was also during the midterm on the first George W. Bush administration, where theoretically Dems would also have a little bit of success. But somehow Norm Coleman got it done in this moderately blue state. And apparently, I didn't even know this, but Senator Tina Smith was actually Walter Mondale's campaign manager at the time. So a lot of connections here running through these Senate seats. Now, if you look at the county map here back in 2002, it does start to look a little bit different. First of all, you see a lot more blue counties on this map. If that's the case, how could Norm Coleman have won? Well, that's going to be because of these suburban counties and in the Twin Cities themselves. They're either going to be red or just not as blue as they would be today when the polarization really kicks in. So this is kind of a shock election, and it happens to be the last time Republicans put up a win here. So this is a significant race, but outside of that, we've also got the governor's race. And as I said, if Tim Walz decides to run for the Senate, that's going to have an impact for governor. Now, I just took a look at this race earlier in the week. So Walz is going to have to decide, is he going to go for governor? Is he going to go for the Senate? Or maybe he decides to retire. I think at this point that seems unlikely. But it says here with Angie Craig, she will run if Walz does not. So maybe you got Walz in the Senate, maybe you've got Craig here for governor. But again, there's a ton of time left. Now, in the last governor's election in 22, Walz won by about 7.5 points. Now, Scott Jensen, the Republican, was a more moderate candidate for the GOP. The thinking was that's the kind of candidate you've got to have to compete in this state. That might be true in a different year, in a different environment, in an open seat, but it was not true here in 22. Walz won comfortably. Now, in that same year of 22, Republicans came less than 1 percentage point away from winning a statewide race. That was here for Attorney General. Now, this is why I said Keith Ellison is not really a strong candidate. Yes, he did win this seat, but he was the incumbent, and overall, Republicans underperformed in many states. So the fact that Ellison just barely scraped out another win here, it seems pretty obvious that he's not the strongest candidate when it comes to statewide politics. This was a few years ago, maybe everything's different now, but it does go to show you here that Republicans can be in contention in some of these races, even if they end up not coming out on top. So that's kind of where we're at. We'll finish it up here on this Axios article. We've got Omar and Craig eyeing bids for the U.S. Senate. Well, I think I pretty much covered everything. Again, I think Omar would give the Republicans the best chance at winning this election. Angie Craig seems like the safe choice, but I think most Democrats will at least start off with a slight advantage. They might end up winning by 10 points, but we've seen some unexpected things happen in this state over the past couple of decades. Norm Coleman taking out Walter Mondale in 2002, Tim Pawlenty winning his second term as governor for the Republicans in 2006, a nail-biter recount election for Al Franken in 2008, a closer than expected election in 2018 for Tina Smith, and for Attorney General, very close to an upset here for Keith Ellison. So we're only in February, but we've got a couple of races already on the map that we're going to be following closely over the next year and a half. So let me know in the comments, what do you think about this Senate seat in Minnesota? Are you surprised about Tina Smith calling it quits? Do you agree that Angie Craig would be a likely win for the Democrats? What about Tim Walz? What's he going to do? What about the Republicans? Who should they nominate? And could they potentially flip this seat under the right circumstances? And what do you think would happen if Ilhan Omar was the nominee? Let me know down below. On your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.